Teddy, I'm playing. Teddy, these are my toys. Honey, that's Gumby. That's Pokey. What are you doing to my friends? Okay. Welcome back, Endurance Nerds. You're joining me after workout number 3 of Zwift Academy Road. I'm just sitting here playing with my toys. Licking my wounds a little bit. That one certainly stung. Things are piling on from workouts 1 and 2. Definitely seeing some additional intensity and more energy system utilization in this workout. And we are reinforcing some of the elements that we've already been practicing in workouts 1 and 2 in a different and more challenging way. This workout is definitely going to be taxing. If you've been doing the shorter variants for the first 2 workouts, I recommend continuing that trajectory unless you're really feeling up to the challenge, because this is going to be a tough workout. However, if you do think you have it in you to push yourself for the longer variant, from a time perspective, the longer workout is not that long at 49 minutes. However, the second working set on this one is really going to be where the rubber meets the road as you're trying to execute those intervals with some fatigue and lactate already built into the legs. So it's going to be a tough one. That being said, if you're finishing up this workout scared that you might not be able to finish up the academy because things are getting harder, this will likely be the hardest workout for most, if not all of you watching this video. From a load to time perspective, this is the most difficult workout. You're going to be working at your VO2 max and your threshold for most of this workout. It's going to be quick and efficient, but it is going to take quite a bit out of you. As you move on through the additional workouts here, workouts 4 through 6, you're going to find that you're going to have shorter execution, a little bit more high intensity, and some sustained efforts below your threshold. That said, as I mentioned in workout number 1, depending on your phenotype and experience, some of you might struggle with those sustained effort workouts a little bit more than something like this, but I think on balance, most of you are going to find workout number 3 the most difficult. Let's talk about the workout itself. It's called the Volcano. The nomenclature comes from the Volcano KOM. They're calling this a simulation workout for that type of climbing effort that you would do for the Volcano KOM in the baseline and finish line ride. I also think that it probably is a little bit representative of the graph here, kind of like some lava bubbling up here. But I'm going to call this workout here a modified over-under workout. Now, if you've never heard of an over-under or under-over, it really doesn't matter. They're very similar workouts. It just depends on which interval comes first. They're pretty much exactly how they sound. You're going to get a series of working sets or intervals that are above and below or over and under a particular center point. Usually that center point is somewhere around or at your FTP. Now, there's a number of different ways to modify an over-under format. There's no hard and fast rules. Sometimes you'll find it really tight within that threshold zone between 95 and 105% of your FTP. Sometimes you're going to see periods of your FTP and then short punchy intervals at VO2 max or even your anaerobic zone. Sometimes you'll see a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of time for the under to the over. It just depends on what the target or the objective of the workout is. There are no rules that are going to qualify something as a strict over-under. But in a general sense, the over-under is targeting your ability to deal with the byproducts of lactate production. More often than not, those over-unders are going to be somewhere in your threshold zone or above. But it's teaching your body to deal with that lactate production at or around your body's ability to clear it at the same rate it's being produced. Oftentimes, working shorter intervals above your FTP in your VO2 max or anaerobic system, so that when you dip back down into that under interval, you're still working around your threshold and your body needs to figure out what to do with that lactate that you've just built up at that higher intensity interval. Lactate clearance capacity is an important skill and ability to have built as a cyclist, both from a mental and a physiological standpoint. You have to be able to deal with the suffering, and your body has to learn how to process that lactate when it's starting to build up in the system. Usually the design of the workout is going to mimic the demands of your events or the type of rider that you are. Usually for something like a triathlete or a time trialist, you're going to see a much tighter locus where you might see your over intervals at 105 or 110% of your FTP and your unders maybe right at your FTP. Whereas for somebody who might be a road racer or a climber, you're going to see more of those over efforts being in your VO2 max zone or even higher in your anaerobic zone. That's what we're going to be seeing in this workout here with some of your over efforts in your VO2 max. Now, why would this particular type of format lend itself better to climbers or racers out there? Well, if you think of the demands of an event that you may have or a climb that you might have, you're really not going to find yourself being able to just kind of fix and dial in at a certain power set point. I'm going to use a couple of examples that this workout here might simulate. First, for those of you who race, whether it's out on the road or just on Zwift for fun, if you've ever tried to get into a breakaway, for instance, you see that first person start to take off and you jump on their wheel, right? They're putting in a pretty big effort to start to break the elastic between them and the rest of the group. They're trying to generate more speed than the larger group with the benefit of drafting off of one another. They're going to have to put in much higher power than the rest of the group is doing. You, on their wheel, are probably still going to have to put out at least threshold level power just to stay on their wheel. And as you guys start to build some separation, that person's going to flick their elbow and want you to come and pull through so they can get a slight amount of reprieve, but the two of you can continue to hold that same level of speed. Right? You guys want to take your chances with the entire group in a sprint, or do you want to try to get first or second place with a much smaller, more decisive group? Many riders who don't have a very strong sprint want the much smaller group. Right? So now it's your turn at the front. You're going to have to put in your VO2 max level effort or your anaerobic effort. And that person in your draft, well, they're probably working at threshold at this point. And after your minute or two of effort, now you're going to flick your elbow, they're going to come through. And you're going to be at threshold and they're going to be at their VO2 max and higher. And it's going to continue until you feel comfortable that you've put some decent distance between you and the rest of the group and you guys can settle into a more sustainable power for the remainder of the race, hopefully. Doing this type of effort in training helps you to understand how that feels, get your body acclimated to that type of force and power production so that you can actually execute that type of effort on the real road. But let's say you don't care about racing. Well, how is this going to be practical for you? Well, just as they mentioned here in the ride description and in the on-screen prompts, they're talking about something like the Volcano KOM, something that might be a short to moderate climb that might take you between 6 and 15 minutes. You're going to be climbing at something around your threshold level power. However, the road is not always going to be set up for you to just lock into a particular power value and hold it all the way up. You're going to see some undulations in terms of the gradient on the road. And whether it comes to maintaining speed or just the forced feedback when you don't have enough gearing to keep a lighter spin, you're probably going to have to be working for certain sections of that climb above your FTP. You might be at your VO2 max. And then when things flatten out a little bit, then you're going to have to settle in somewhere around your threshold to, again, keep up speed, keep the bike upright, keep up that momentum. So it's definitely a practical way of applying power. Of course, on the road, things won't look as crisp and even as something like this graph, but this is pretty similar to what people might see on something like a hill climb. Now, why do I say this workout is a modified over-under? Well, that's because just like the last workout, they've worked in some micro rests here. So instead of having one contiguous, sustained under-over type of effort for X number of minutes, they're going to do an under-over with the micro rest, then another, then a micro rest, and then another. This is a good way, just like workout number 2, to get the body acclimated to that type of execution. And as you continue to practice and build on that, you can start to connect those together without the micro rest and be able to sustain those as one contiguous effort with time and training. So let's talk about the structure of the workout. Again, I'm going to focus on the longer variant, but the shorter variant is very similar, just truncated. So in this case, the longer variant has 2 working sets, and the shorter variant at 34 minutes versus 49 is going to have 1 working set. So you're basically just lopping off the second set of the workout here to do the shorter variant. So very similar. Again, as I mentioned, the more challenging portion in that second set is that you're going to have that lactate and that fatigue already built into the legs. So that's where your adaptations start to really get made. So if you're feeling like you can attack that type of workout, you're going to see a lot more value in the longer variant. But if you're not ready for that, there is no shame in doing the shorter workout. You have to crawl before you walk and run. So start where it is appropriate for you. Don't feel like you have to do the workouts because you're cheating if you don't. We all start somewhere. So let's talk about the structure by the numbers here. Again, that first warm-up, same old, 8 minutes ascending warm-up from 40% to 80% of your FTP. Nothing new. Another 3 minutes at 55% of your FTP. But this is where they did something a little bit more intelligent with the warm-up and extended it for some priming sets. As I mentioned in workout number 1, when I recommended you guys do some warm-ups offline, a priming set is a way of really working out the staleness in the legs by doing some warming intervals around the target power for the rest of the workout. It really will let you know where you stand on the day. As you get through that section of the extended warm-up, you'll know if you're really up for the task here. If you can't even turn the pedals over for this priming set, you're probably not ready for this workout today. However, if you're just feeling a little bit junky, but you can get through it, you probably worked through some of that nastiness in the legs, got those cobwebs cleared out of the way, and hopefully will be primed and ready for the working sets. So what is that going to look like? You're going to start with 3 minutes of 85% of your FTP. Then you're going to move into 1 minute at 95% of your FTP. Then another minute at 105% of your FTP. And then ending with 1 minute at 110% of your FTP. 110% of your FTP is going to be a spoiler for the remainder of the workout. That's going to be your VO2 max execution of power that you're going to see for the over intervals in the working sets. You're going to get 3 minutes of recovery at 55% of your FTP, and then you're going to work into your working sets. Your working sets are going to be 10 minutes each. If you're doing the shorter variant, you're only going to have one of those, and if you're doing the longer, you're going to have 2. And your working sets are designed pretty simply. You're going to have 90 seconds or a minute and a half at that under interval, and that's going to be at 95% of your FTP. So that's the very lower edge of your threshold zone. You're still in that zone 4 threshold zone, but you're not quite at your FTP. Then you're going to move into 90 seconds again at 110% of your FTP. At that point, you are working in your VO2 max. You're increasing lactate production to a rate that's faster than your body can clear. After that, you're going to get a 30-second micro rest at 55% of your FTP, and then you're going to repeat that pairing again. A minute and 30 seconds at 95% of your FTP, and a minute and 30 seconds at 110% of your FTP. So you're going to do that pairing 3 times. If you're doing the shorter variant, that's where you're going to begin your cool down. If you're doing the long variant, you're going to get 5 minutes of recovery, and then you're going to repeat those 3 interval pairings again. After which you're going to get a short 4-minute cool down, ramping you down from 55% to about 40% of your FTP, and then you're going to call it a day. So again, neither of those workouts is terribly long, but it's going to pack a punch in a very short period of time. As I mentioned in the last workout, I would have probably liked to have seen at least this 5 minutes in between the 2 working sets for the longer variation to be at a lower percentage of FTP, somewhere around 40% full recovery. That's the purpose of that recovery set there. There's really no benefit in doing it at just below your zone 2 power. It seems like just a drag and drop, copy and paste type of thing. So if you're really looking for some full recovery between those 2 working sets, don't be afraid to turn off that erg mode or crank that bias down just for that recovery set, and then jump back into the working intervals with full recovery of heart rate and cadence. Again, at around the 5-minute mark, they're going to talk about bias and the ability to turn it up or down by 25% and doing what's right for you. I won't repeat that rant in its entirety for those of you who already watched the last video. I'll link that one down below for those who haven't caught it already. But the TLDR is if you're turning that bias down by more than 5%, you're pushing yourself out of the intended power zones and you're not going to get the prescribed benefit of the workout, and you're better off either reevaluating your FTP or coming back to fight another day. Now, getting into these working sets here, I recommend a higher cadence. As I mentioned in the last couple of workouts, working at a lower cadence is going to engage type 2 muscle fibers. Those muscle fibers are already going to be taxed by the fact that you are working at and above your FTP. You can generate somewhat of a muscle sparing effect by relying a little bit more on leg speed and contraction rate at a bit of a penalty to your heart rate. You will find that your heart rate might be a little bit higher by spinning your legs faster, but you won't be baking as much fatigue into the muscles, and they're more likely to be able to get you through all of the working sets and intervals to come. If you're capable of doing so, I would recommend trying to maintain a cadence at or above 95 RPM, at least above 90 RPM. It may not be the most comfortable or natural for many of you, but it may help you to get through these types of intervals, especially if you are newer. That being said, there's no harm in trying to practice these at a lower cadence, especially if you're practicing for something like a climb, where you don't always have the gearing to maintain 95 RPM or or higher. It's going to be dependent on the objectives of your training, but if you are newer to this type of interval and you're a little worried about being able to get through it, starting at those higher cadences might help to spare your muscles a little bit so you can get through the second working set. I did mention this in the last couple videos, but again, that riding through the arch instead of trying to back off the second or two before the arch, if you're in erg mode, you're going to struggle a little bit more trying to get back on top of the gear and in control of your cadence. If you keep spinning through that arch, you can maintain a lot more stability into that 30-second recovery valley, and then you can get back on top of the gear a lot more easily when the next interval comes up. I recommend doing most, if not all of these intervals seated, so like I mentioned in the past, you're not baking in any unnecessary torque into the legs. Also, doing intervals standing tends to spike the heart rate for a lot of people, and as you're going to be operating close to, if not above, your lactate threshold heart rate, that might be a struggle for many of you. So if you can get through these intervals seated, except for maybe the last 10 seconds as you're trying to finish off that VO2 max set before the recovery, I recommend staying in the saddle. Nutrition, yet again for this workout, same as the first two, you're going to need sugars on board. In fact, you're probably going to need more sugars on board than the last two workouts just because of the demand of this particular workout. The strategy I use seemed to make it easy to remember to bring those carbs on board. I took a gel during the first warm-up. I took a gel during the 5-minute interval of recovery in between the two working sets. And then throughout the workout, I was sipping on my sport drink that had about 50 grams of carbohydrates in there. So that was keeping me on track for about that 90 grams of carbs per hour that is recommended for this type of intensity. Make sure that the nutrition that you're taking is something that you're acclimated to. Sometimes you have to build yourself into being able to absorb and take on that type of carbohydrate intake. Sometimes that type of sports nutrition can cause gastrointestinal distress, especially if you're newer, but that is a target that you can ideally work your way into for the best execution and keeping those glycogen stores topped up for high levels of power. But you can see a lot of the same themes from the first two workouts in terms of strategy and being able to get through, just learning and experiencing these general tenets. This is going to be a hard workout. I struggled with this workout a little bit. I got a good night's sleep last night, but I've been coming off of a week of just work stress and lack of sleep. You can't just catch up with that on a night. I started with pretty low HRV and recovery today. I knew it wasn't going to be a breakthrough day. I did get through the workout and I did execute all of the intervals as prescribed, but on a good day, I could probably just string these longer working sets together without those 30-second micro rests. I feel like those were the only reason I got through this workout today, feeling a little bit stale from a pretty tough, stressful week, just from a general life perspective. It doesn't matter how much experience you have, you are not going to necessarily nail your workouts every single time. I've been trying to reiterate this point about FTP over and over again. I've seen a couple comments here and there in the comments of these videos talking about, well, you should be able to hold your FTP for 40 or 60 minutes, so these workouts should be easy. It's categorically false. It's just not true. That's a hasty generalization that cannot be made about training. Depending on where you are in your training, your experience, what time of the year that it is going to depend on how competently you're going to finish these types of sets. When you're at your peak, yeah, knocking out 20, 30, 40 minutes at your FTP is probably going to be something that's achievable for you. But how do you work your way into that? You have to start with smaller pieces. You have to start with modifications of the workout. Even if you're experienced with this, let's say after your base season, or maybe you just haven't been doing as much structured training during the summer season and just enjoying the outside. You have to reacclimate the muscles, the body, and the brain, most importantly, to doing this type of power execution. Don't be discouraged by the bros in the comments or elsewhere on the interwebs that are saying something, speaking above their station when it comes to structured training, information, and knowledge. Despite some of my nitpicky criticisms on some of the designs of these workouts so far, like copy and paste warm-ups and maybe some adjustments that can be made to the recovery valleys here, I think that they've done a pretty decent job of balancing these workouts pretty well. They're still going to be challenging for those people at their peaks that might have some experience doing this or have been working things like threshold and VO2 max efforts all along. It's certainly not going to be a cakewalk. You're still doing enough work to make them challenging, but also making them achievable to people who are really starting to work their way into those longer efforts. They're starting to build their way into better execution of their FTP, making these a little bit more manageable. Those little 30-second micro rests in workout number 2 and workout number 3 could make all the difference in the world and can inspire more confidence in the people doing these workouts, hey, you know, I can do these with 30-second micro rests here right now and today. Maybe in a couple weeks, I can reduce those down to 15 seconds. In another few weeks, I might be able to do them without those micro rests at all. I'm not that far off in terms of sustaining this power. I'm getting better. I'm improving. But if you just say everybody needs to be able to hold 40 to 60 minutes at their FTP, that's your workout for the day, I'm sorry. I think that that's short-sighted. I think that that's irresponsible, and no real coach or individual with experience with structured training and periodization is actually going to say that. So don't pay any attention to things like that. It's just going to be discouraging. Don't let that get into your head. Just keep plugging away. You've got shorter and longer variants for that very reason. Work yourself into these different training foundations in a way that fits you, your experience, and your needs. And most of all, have fun. Take pride in what you're doing. Take those wins. If you fail on the day, that's okay. We learn from failure. That's what the Academy is for, to get better as athletes. So that's enough of that. Workout number 3 in the books. Leave any questions about this workout or future workouts in the comments down below. Hit that like button to help to get this video out in front of other people for whom it could be helpful. Thank you guys again ever so much for watching, and as always, I will catch you in the next one. See ya.